as we just talked about before we went live. I've got to go navigate to another screen here and make sure, and then I'll monitor the conversation from there. But assuming that we are in fact live, thank you so much for joining. Just want to introduce Krystal Mitchell, the Senior Manager of Software Engineering at Inside Real Estate. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Scotty. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about myself while you go check to make sure we're live.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, great. I'll be right back.
Yeah, so my name's Krystal. I've been in tech since I was a kid. So jumped into programming in junior high, and right out of high school had a database administration job. And I got right in and I was writing scripts to note anomalies for imports. And this is back before, this is FTP imports, old school. And just to date myself a little bit, in junior high, I was doing GW Basic. So I've been in the industry for 20 years, did a lot with database stuff and then analytics and marketing, then jumped into development. We had our own company as a family, and we did a lot of marketing and coding and just whatever our customers wanted. And then I decided 15 years into the industry to go back and actually get a piece of paper that could say I could do what I was already doing. So, and since then I've worked for Inside Real Estate, and then I worked at New Relic out of San Francisco, which is a great experience. And I'm actually back at Inside Real Estate now with a lot of good friends. It was hard not to take that opportunity to go back to working with code that I helped create, and with a great team of just really some of the nicest engineers I've ever worked with. So
awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that history. And we're going to dive into some of those things here as we continue the conversation. I am curious, like, when you look back on your career, what would you say are some of the highlights for you thus far? I think you might have mentioned some just now, but curious what you would highlight.
It's hard to highlight just one thing because it kind of feels like a living, breathing thing that's constantly changing. And a lot of the things that happen are team centric or are based on having an amazing mentor or sponsor. But I would say, wow, a lot of ums. A lot of the things that I'd highlight would be the experience I gained at New Relic. Those very technical, very intelligent people, and an amazing mentor there. And the work I was doing there was top notch. So that'd probably be one of the highlights of my career so far.
Very cool. Very cool. So I think, going kind of back to you went quickly over your history. I'm really curious, like, what inspired the entry into technology? Is there an origin story there? Did you fall into it? Like, how did it come about?
Yeah, there's probably two parts of that. So I was inspired by my mom. So my mom became a single mom back in the 90s, and she decided to go back and get her bachelor's in computer science back before the dot-com era hit. And so watching her do that, it kind of debunked any stigmas that, girls can't code or whatever. And she was the only female in her program. But watching her do that was an inspiration. But then even earlier than that, both my grandpas are engineers. And so I had one grandpa who would take us, he was one of the first engineers to bring aluminum to the lathe to build race car parts. And he'd bring us into his factory, and we get to see all the cool stuff at Mitchell Wheels. And I was just fascinated on how everything worked. And then my other grandpa, we called him the Hunt for Red October grandpa. They actually consulted with him for that movie and filmed part of it in his office. He was a sonar engineer and did technology for all sorts of countries. And he would hand me, this is a cool thing, he would actually hand me puzzles all the time and time me. I didn't realize he was doing this. He had already solved them and he timed himself. And then he'd hand them to me and time me, and I'd always get them faster than he would. And I had no idea. It would drive him crazy. And he'd hand me, like, every time I'd see him, he'd hand me a new puzzle, like with the ropes and the rings or the metal parts or the horseshoes. And I feel like I was being conditioned to be an engineer from the start. So there's no chance of me not being an engineer. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, there's so much there that I want to revisit. Maybe just a focus on, what your mom and what she ended up doing. I mean, I think again, lots of cool backstory there that got you interested. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your mom's journey.
Yeah, she's still a solid mentor for me. I mean, we're both very independent women and do our own thing. We don't hang out every day, but there's times where we'll just shoot the breeze about work. And she's worked with large companies like Amazon and Facebook as a TPM because she has so many soft skills as well as engineering skills that she can really help bridge that gap and communicate with the customer and work with those a little more intense customers and making sure they're getting the service that they need, but also working with engineers, making sure they can, instead of just saying, hey, no, we can't do that. Well, how can we do that? What are the solutions here that we can find for this customer? That she's really good at just being kind of like that. You're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in that role, though, because engineers are saying no, and often the customer's saying, I don't care, I want it. And you only have so many engineers to work with. And so hearing those stories from her have been amazing and have helped so much, like, and how she mitigates conflict with, very confident engineers or very confident clients. And hearing those tactics has been honestly has added a lot to my career and just my ability to do that on my own as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. I love that. That's so cool. And again, obviously you come from your family history is rich in engineering, so no surprise that you landed here. But I really do appreciate the backstory there. And again, very cool, very cool. All right, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. I'm curious because you have worked in different industries. How has technology differed across the industries that you've worked in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Especially with software as a service, you think it would always kind of be the same, but it's not. So software as a service, for example, a real estate technology is only going to cater to realtors and that demographic. And so the kind of technology and how we're building it is very different than, per se, what we were building at New Relic, where it was software as a service for all developers, where your demographic are developers. So you have to mitigate for any potential hacking all the time, and you have to lock that sucker down. You also have like contracts where you have to have certain security levels that are higher than others, and having those kind of things in place. And where there's smaller companies I've worked for as well, where you can roll something out with a bug and okay, if it doesn't work, just roll it back right into production. Totally fine, not a big deal. Let's just get it out there. Let's see if it works. Where that would never happen at some of the larger corporations who just have very strict SLAs, where we cannot break this. We cannot make this, has to always be accessible. This cannot be exposed. And so, how we architect and the amount of time it takes to architect something is a lot slower, but then it's also more scalable on one side of things. And on the other side of things, you can move faster because you can just roll it into production and hope it works. Not ideal, not best practice. Do not recommend that. And I cringe when I've seen it happen and I try to let's just roll that into staging and test it there for a little bit. And we don't have that, let's set that up. But even then, it's definitely faster pace when you're not as worried about certain demographics. So it definitely varies per company size, and per demographic. And the technology you use sometimes at smaller companies can be outdated because they don't have the manpower to overhaul things and get up to speed, but everything works great and it's efficient. So who cares? Let's do it the best way possible, while still giving our customer quality product. But it's been interesting because every company is different. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that I mean, it makes sense, especially to your point, depending on those industries, the ones that have more of a focus on security. Though I'd love to talk a little bit more, and we'll get into that a little bit when we a little later in this interview, because security is definitely a hot button these days, rightfully so, as we move more and more of our lives online. It's definitely something we've got to think through. I'm curious though, you mentioned again your mom's career and her role as a TPM. I think you meant technical project manager, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it begs the question, it sounds like you've had some great mentoring from her, but how do you balance what you bring from a technical perspective and the business acumen that you have to possess, especially in your current role as a technical leader?
Yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to it, having a growth mindset makes a huge difference. Also, I have a background in UX design. So my first degree was in graphic design. I worked a lot in design and programming here and there, but it was primarily design. And so having that helps me understand the user better. So I'm user-centric and I'm growth-centric. Then I'm also an engineer. And having that mindset when you're picking up a ticket, you're not just going to be like, do X, Y, and Z, the box checks, but maybe it doesn't actually, get to the next page in a reasonable amount of time, or it spins forever, or it doesn't disable, so you can click it twice and do the same thing twice, or get billed twice, and those kind of things. But also on a growth mindset, do we need to build a Ferrari right out of the gate, or can we do with a Pinto and just get the project out the door so we can start selling this to customers and then we can iterate? So definitely helps to have that growth mindset, but also user-centric focus. Like, how is this going to impact the user? And anytime I hear an engineer say, oh, well, they're just going to have to figure that out, I'm like, no, wait, no, they shouldn't know that. We shouldn't have to train our users on how to use our product. It should be intuitive. So
no, I have to imagine that gives you a big leg up. And it begs the question, this isn't one we necessarily planned but do you have a process when it comes to your team with regard to a focus, or at least some awareness about the user experience?
Yeah, I mean, each team's different, especially if the team, like for example, right now I have a QA team as part of our team, which is great, but I would expect the engineer to pull down the code that they wrote. They should always have it, I mean, pulled down, but they should build it and test it out themselves before they send it on over to QA. And they should think about it as if they've never used it before. And so I think that's one of the processes, but having QA go through and click things in QA, I think they're trained to just like go in there and be like, you know, I don't know what's going on. But an engineer is like, well, I know what I'm supposed to do next. It's like, yeah, but is that intuitive to the user? So giving them that mindset of someone who's never seen this before, would they know what to do? And I'll ask those kind of questions. We'll just tell them, hey, this is how we're going to do this. It's like, yeah, because, or me being a new engineer on a new project, for example, or a leader on a new project, that's a great time for me to go in there and ask those kind of questions. Like, I've never seen this product before. How is this supposed to work? Should this be more obvious? I have no clue what I'm supposed to do here. And I had that with a new product recently. I'm like, but what is this for? This says search. Is it search or is it filter? And it turns out it was a filter. I'm like, okay, good to know. I didn't know that. So we talked about updating the icon to use the filter icon versus the search. And that helped a lot.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that, I think, again, that's you know, that's in my mind, a little nugget of wisdom that we can share with our audience as it relates to just, you know, how to think through leadership of engineers, right? That UX background and experience, and again, the business acumen necessary for that. It makes perfect sense. Okay, so real quick, I just want to, for those people that have joined, and again, thank you so much for joining the live stream today. I've got Krystal Mitchell. She's Senior Manager of Software Engineering at Inside Real Estate. And we're just kind of talking a little bit about, we've gone through history. We're talking a little bit about some best practices. We mentioned earlier security. So it begs the question, you know, for you as a leader, how do you assess and manage risk when it comes to the technical projects that you're managing?
Yeah, one of my favorite exercises to do with the team is a risk matrix board or risk matrices. So you go through, and it's kind of like a doomsday experiment. Like, what are the worst things that could happen here? And like, what if Amazon goes down? What if this product goes down, or this third-party dependency goes down, or what if our database goes down? You go through all of them, and then you break them down into which ones would we avoid, which ones would we triage, which ones would we mitigate, and then you categorize them all based on that. So if one does occur, you already have a plan in place. And then if there's work to be done to mitigate, like for example, if Amazon goes down and we're trying to send emails out through SES, you know, what's our way to mitigate those emails? Can they be lost? Do we need to store them so they can eventually get out? Like what do we need to do to make sure our customers still get what they need? And then the biggest one in that is when everything gets back up and working, can it handle it? If we have 7,000 refresh tokens going through every second, and then everyone gets kicked off and everyone needs a refresh token all at once, we're talking 1 million refresh tokens coming through all at once. How do we handle that without breaking everything again? And then with that, you can do game days, and you can go in and you can kind of just go through and see what you can break. That's a great one. And that's also a great way for your engineers to say, wait, how does this work? They should know that, but you don't always work on all pieces of the code, which is normal. But having a fresh set of eyes on different pieces of the code are a great way, or the UI even, are a great way to understand your product better and see where things need to be fixed to prevent, you know, any user error is usually engineering error at the core. So
That's amazing. You know, in some ways, my limitations as a layperson, as a technical recruiter, as opposed to a technical professional, I don't necessarily know if that's a best practice. Would you say that's something that you see kind of standard in the industry, or is that something that you feel like is not necessarily a standard best practice out there?
I wish it was best practice, but it's not. Larger companies, I would say, of about 1,500 or more I've seen do it. It's hit and miss per company. Smaller companies, they still do it. They'll still do the game days as per company. I think it has to do with the individual engineering leaders. Do they have an engineering excellence or quality standards for their engineering? And how are they implementing that? And how are they prioritizing security versus other tech debt items that they need to take care of? So.
Well, in my mind, a ton of value that you just added there in terms of, you know, practical takeaways for other engineering leaders to think about. And I'm also imagining that not only are you able to identify and mitigate potential risks, but it may foster some innovation. How do you, as a leader of engineers, foster that innovation and experimentation in your teams?
Yeah, I think a lot of that first starts with having open conversations and making sure anyone feels comfortable asking any questions or throwing any ideas out there on the table at any time without judgment. Because you're always going to get some questions, especially from new engineers that do seem more rudimentary, but those should be wanted and encouraged. You still want your engineers to go Google something if it's just like a new word they haven't heard before. But at the same time, it's okay to even to ask those questions. I think as a leader, there's going to be times where I don't know something that they do. And for me to show them that I'm okay asking those questions, say, hey, I'm not sure if I quite understand what you're talking about here. And can you help me get up to speed? Opens the door for them to do the same. But then on top of that, when it comes to innovating, are we doing exercises? Are we letting, as far as like tech weeks, are we giving them the opportunity to just throw out cool ideas or innovations that we can do on an existing product and ways to make it better? Not just tech debt. But yeah.
Well, so what I'm hearing is you, you know, taking the first step towards some vulnerability on your own, probably it sets that example for your team to be able to do the same thing. And as a recruiter, I think again we refer to that as psychological safety, but it's absolutely critical. And generally speaking, we see with the best leaders and the best companies that there is an environment of psychological safety. You just again kind of outlined how you foster that. So that's fantastic. Really, really cool insight there. Again, for those that have just joined, thanks so much. We've got Krystal Mitchell, Senior Manager at Inside Real Estate, just dropping knowledge here. So it's really appreciated, and we're getting close, but I've got a few more questions. I think, again, talking about your team, well, let me ask it this way. What do you look for? What does good look like in a team member when you've got an open position that you're trying to fill?
Yeah, I just real quick, just I do have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. Got a meeting I get on to. When it
Hey,
comes
fair
to
enough. We're in the middle of our workday here, so we'll wrap
yeah,
it quick.
thank you. When hiring new engineers or leaders, the first thing I'm looking for is humility. Teachability would be another one, and then someone who's self-sufficient. Like, are they going to get in and get their hands dirty? But then at the same time, are they? I think it goes back to humility. Are they humble enough to ask questions when they're stuck instead of just spinning for hours on end? But having a leader or an engineer who can reach out when they do get stuck, but say, I'm going to keep working on this. If I figure it out, I'll let you know. But if you have the answer, that would save me some time. That kind of a mindset helps. Another thing I do when I'm interviewing is I will purposely ask them questions of things they know to see how they handle that. Can they stay humble in responding to those kind of questions that are a little rudimentary? Just to see if they've got a chip on their shoulder or not. Because anyone can be taught something. I've had engineers who if they're teachable and they're hungry, I can make that work. But if someone is so stuck in knowing everything, it's very hard to teach them new things and to, maybe break some bad habits. The other thing I do is I ask them a question of something I know they don't know. And I'll kind of keep pushing until I get to something that they just don't know, just to see if they can say, I don't know. And then also to see how would they respond to that? How would they solve for that? They didn't know, But, yeah.
I love it. Again, you just preempted the how, right? How do you get to that with those last two comments that you made? So that makes perfect sense. And okay, cool. I'm going to move quick since I am mindful of your hard stop. So if again for this, the purposes of this LinkedIn Live is to try to add value to the community. And so I'm thinking about aspiring leaders, maybe people that are early or mid-level in their career, and they want to get to where you are today. What advice do you have for them to get there, and how did you do it?
Yeah, the number one thing would be to find a good mentor or sponsor. So I have an amazing mentor. His name's Tad Sakashita, and he's more of a sponsor. He'll even put his neck out on the line for me and advocate on my behalf as far as my career progression goes. But he would bring me into meetings as a fly on the wall, and I could just see how he interacted with people differently. So if he was working with one engineer who communicate very differently than with another based on their personality type and the way they communicated, and when he was in a room of engineers versus a room of stakeholders or C-suite individuals, he would communicate completely differently. Like, he would read the room and he would tailor his communication to the room in a very efficient way, in a way that got buy-in on both up and down as far as leadership and teams go.
Very cool. How did you meet him? Did you guys work together or?
Yeah, I worked with him at New Relic.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I've had other mentors along the way that have been amazing.
Very cool. Okay. And then I think last question, again, keeping in mind our time constraint, Krystal Mitchell, Senior Manager of Inside Real Estate. Thank you so much for joining. Last question I have before we wrap this meeting and get you to your next one. What technology trends are you paying close attention to right now? What do you kind of think is going to matter? I think we all hear the news, we kind of have an idea of where you're going to go, but what do you see, and how can technical professionals adapt and prepare for these?
Yeah, I think AI is all over the news right now and everyone's afraid of it. It's going to take jobs. Not that I've been in the industry that long before, but the last 20 years, even a little bit before the dot-com bomb, all I've seen is it actually creating more jobs. It's never taken any jobs away. It just speeds up the process and opens up more doors for more opportunities. I have been having fun playing around with AI Bard, Google Bard, and then ChatGPT, and comparing the two and sending the same prompts to the two. And I've noticed one's really good with code and one's actually much better with text, as far as data modeling goes. And one just has a larger set of data. But a good thing to do would be, experiment with this stuff, play around on the weekends, create a little, I thought about creating a little extension similar to Grammarly. I can plug into any text editor and just auto-populate that instead of doing it per product. You can just bring it in.
Sure.
Those kind of things, like you should, if you're not a programmer, if you're just more of a leader, then it would just be to be reading the things, not the gloom and doom. I'm just trying to spin stuff to get reactions on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
but what's new, what's out there, what does it support, what's open source stuff is available for free, and what are the risks there? Like, can we expose certain data to it? Like, if we're going to be using this with our product, how do we mitigate that and not expose emails, so we can stay GDPR compliant as far as exposing personal data. There's lots of different resources out there. You can find them. Another thing I would recommend, this is kind of side note, kind of going back to leadership, is my favorite book is The Strategist. It's by Cynthia Montgomery, I believe. And it's just a really great way as a leader to kind of stay in the loop with things, but also just have a strategic mindset and a business-centric mindset as you're leading in an organization. So.
Excellent. Practical tip right there. So The Strategist was the
Yes.
name of the book, by Cynthia, one more time.
Montgomery.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. I'll see if I can find that and make a comment about it in this post that we'll have after we wrap. So real quick, you mentioned Google Bard and ChatGPT. You said one has larger data set. I imagine that's got to be Google, correct?
Yeah. Google is like, I'd be curious as to how much data they have on everyone. Myself.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. And is the better text editor ChatGPT?
So far, yeah. It's
Okay.
just like, if I'm asking for it to take this and make it into this file format, it'll just do it. But then the response from Google Bard is actually better. It's just not formatted. I think it's just brand new. I'm in the experimental version right now. And so it won't format it the way I expected. And I'll say, hey, take that and put it into a file with this format, and it'll still break it up, but it's better and it's actually more accurate. So that one is 6s at the moment. But as far as everything else go, I would say Google Bard is far superior. So
awesome. Krystal, I'm going to let you jump because I know you've got this hard stop and another meeting coming, but thank you so much for joining. Again, I feel like you had a ton of value, and I was just along for the ride. So thanks so much for being on, and all the best. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Scotty. Bye.
See you.
See you, everyone.